Amendment by Little.
The chair recognizes Mr. Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm going to let this amendment populate. Let's take our time, talk through this. So, members, there's been a modification to this bill that would permit people who fall within the scope of this bill, all of the barred foreign actors, to engage in a lease of 100 years or less. This is, to put it mildly, a loophole that you could drive a Mack truck through. For those of you who are in real estate, or you may be real estate lawyers in the room, you may be familiar with the concept of a ground lease. Oftentimes in commercial real estate development, someone who wishes to develop a piece of commercial property will enter into a ground lease that may be 99 years long, where they own the improvements, but they never purchase the dirt. They lease it for a period of 99 years. What I would submit to you is we ought to limit leasehold interests per this amendment to no longer than 2 years. And I move adoption of this amendment, but I understand there is an amendment to my amendment.
The following amendment to the amendment, the clerk will read the amendment to the amendment.
Amendment by Toth.
Chair recognizes Mr. Toth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this moves it to 1 year. Move adoption.
The amendment is
The question is on the amendment to the amendment. The amendment to the amendment is acceptable to the author. It is a record vote, however. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Leach voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 89 ayes, 56 nays, the amendment to the amendment is adopted. The chair recognizes Mr. Wu to speak on. Chair recognizes Mr. Wu to speak on the amendment as amended.
Members, it's interesting that Mr. Little added this amendment because this is actually, remember I said earlier that this bill is very similar to the bill that we passed 100 years ago. And now with this amendment on, it's almost exactly the same. Because back then they also said you're not allowed to buy land, and if you live here, you can only live here for a little while. In fact, that was what was passed in Texas. That was passed in the first state that passed this law, California. They said the maximum was 3 years, and then you can't be renewed. So you have to go live somewhere else after that. So you say that the leases are only 1 year, and then later on they're going to change it to say once the lease is up, don't bother staying. I'm asking, please, I don't know how the bill author is going to do, but I would ask us to PNV
Mr. Manuel, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Mr. Wu, would you yield for a question?
Yes.
He will.
You
Go
brought
ahead,
up
Mr. Manuel.
Passed law in California, wanting to know, did you know that we brought or invited Chinese immigrants here to work on railroads?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, when Chinese and Japanese people first came in the early 1800s, they were asked to come to do sort of the worst jobs there were, to die on the railroad, to die in mines, to do the dirtiest, nastiest jobs. And what was interesting was Asian Americans back then had a strange place in our society. In fact, in the late 1800s, they were actually below everyone else. Because while African Americans could not live in the same neighborhoods as whites, Asian Americans were not allowed to live in a state at all. In fact, 16 states passed laws, some of them even into their own constitution, that said Chinese people, Japanese people are not allowed to purchase anything in our state.
Do you know
not
where
even lease.
the large lynching that ever happened in American history was, and what group that was affected by that?
I don't know.
It was Chinese Americans in California, because they were living there working on the railroad that we invited them to, and then a group of European and American settlers went in and massacred over 100 Chinese immigrants who they had invited into that land. Also, lastly, because I'm bringing that up to show how these kind of laws start and create negative notions about other people and how it turns to violence. Do you know why in America opium is considered illegal, as in when we had opium dealers?
No, tell me.
Because they said after we had used Chinese immigrants to come here and work on the railroads and we massacred them, they started a propaganda tool that said Chinese men would smoke opium and get so horny that they had to rape white women.
Yep.
So we made opium illegal, which is the same reason we made cocaine illegal, because they said black men would get so horny that we would have to go out and rape white women. And the reason marijuana is illegal is because they said Mexicans would get too horny and thus rape white women. I appreciate you bringing up the history of this, because that is what it turned into when we passed laws like this over 100 years ago.
So this bill originally, Mr. Hefner said that
Mr. Speaker?
we want to have reciprocity and treat like other countries treat us. China and many of those other countries, nobody owns property. Everyone has a 99-year lease. And in China, if an American wants to own property or a 99-year lease, all they would have to do is be in the country for a year,
Ms.
be a resident.
Hawkins, for what purpose?
Representative Wu,
Ms.
I
Gervin
want-
Hawkins, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for question?
Would you
I will.
yield, Mr. Wu?
I will.
He will.
Representative
Go ahead.
Wu, when we talk about foreign nationals coming and making investments, is there anything in this bill that you're aware of that protects foreign nationals' property? We were just talking about Yang Min over here, okay? And Yang Min brought $1 billion to the NBA his first year he was here in Houston.
Yeah.
Are we now talking about potentially, since that is considered an adversarial country, are we now talking about taking his property?
Yep. So it's not just that, and I think it's actually much, much worse than that. So what I don't think people will talk about is if you go up and down the Texas coast, you look at all the refineries, the petrochemical plants, many of them, if not almost all of them, have some kind of connection to this bill, because most of those are international conglomerates. They're investment firms that work with multiple people. They have investors from all over the world. And this bill would touch most of them.
And so
touch
that
many
means
of them.
the attorney general could come in and say you're from an adversarial country and take all of those people's property
Absolutely.
and destroy those businesses
And sell it off.
and sell it off from under them.
And here's the other thing. These companies that are coming here, one of the first things they do is, how is life for our people who are going to come and work here, who are going to be expats here, who are going to come and work these jobs and help get this started? And we tell them, you can't own a home, and you can only rent for 1 year, and that's it?
Thank you, Representative Wu. I'm going to wait till the bill after because I need him to show me the page, the section, and the line that protects our foreign professional athletes.
This is
Mr.
now that
Speaker?
this amendment has been amended more, this is now horrific. But
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Jones, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield?
Would you
for
yield,
questions?
Mr. Wu?
I will yield for questions.
He
So
does,
I
man.
want to get back to this amendment and Houston, since we both represent Houston. Are you familiar with the A-Leaf area?
Oh yes, that's part of my district.
Right, and I don't know if you know this, I went to ELSIC.
Yeah.
But do you remember a period when in A-Leaf it was dilapidated
Yes,
and no one wanted to invest in A-Leaf?
absolutely.
And people who were homeowners were upset because it was high crime. No, the city didn't pay any
Yup.
attention to A-Leaf.
Yep.
And is it not true, Rep. Wu, that the Southeast Asian community, including the Chinese community, came and invested in the A-Leaf area? Is that not true?
Absolutely. You
And-
come to Southwest Houston right now, what you will see is one of the most vibrant areas in the entire state.
And-
Non-stop growth. It generates incredible amounts of income for the city and for the county. Even when we were in recession, that area was still growing.
And let me be clear, as it relates to this amendment, it took more than a year to bring A-Leaf back, correct?
Oh, yes.
So
It was a
people weren't
decade-long
just
process.
having 1 year, they were having multi-year leases. Is that accurate, Rep. Wu?
Yes.
And they also were buying property. Is that correct, Rep.
Yes,
Wu?
because-
Property that nobody else would buy.
Absolutely, and that's the point is many of those people, they're buying their first homes, they're buying their very first businesses, they're buying like a little donut shop, a little noodle shop, or something. And I understand people's concerns about foreign nations, but we're not talking about foreign nations, we're talking about individual people like my family, like Representative Vo's family, like Angie Chen Button's family, who we come here, we have no politics, we just want to escape the oppression and the hell of back home, of the country that we were born in, right? My parents, my family was thrown into the fields. My dad was thrown into the fields when he was 13 and left to die out there. And when almost 55 million people died, right? Our family tried to get out of there as fast as we could.
And the fact that someone like your family or someone like Rep. Vo's family can come to this country because they can try to attain the American dream.
That's it.
And even though you're born in a country does not make you hostile to the United States. Sometimes you are literally moving to this country in order to escape the oppression of those countries,
And
correct?
again, this amendment attacks the little person, the person at the bottom, at the person who has to rent. They can't even buy a home. They have to rent. We're talking about students. We're talking about workers, like bottom level workers who are just trying to scrape by.
And do you think,
And this is the way we treat them.
and I'm curious about the limiting it to a year. Do you have to like move from a different apartment or do you have to leave the country after a year? I'd be
The
curious
gentleman's
about
time
that.
has expired.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Little to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, move adoption.
The amendment is acceptable to the author. This is a record vote on the amendment as amended. Vote aye if you're in favor of the amendment, nay if you are not. It's a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Mr. Little voting aye, Mr. Hunter voting aye. Mr. Basut voting aye. Mr. Anchia voting no. Mr. Buckley voting aye. Members vote from your desk, please. Ms. Kerwin voting aye. Have all members voted? Being 84 ayes, 19 nays, the amendment is adopted. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.